Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Financial Times' political correspondent, Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe, and the columnist for the article, Ali Miraj. Great to see both of you. So, to the front pages then. Let's start with the Financial Times. Jasmine and her colleagues at the FT reporting that the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, is to meet ambulance unions tomorrow to discuss how they will handle cover during their strike. The Guardian has spoken to NHS officials who have warned that the industrial action could cost lives. According to The Sun, would-be ambulance users are being advised to take taxis instead. Tomorrow's strike by nurses is the top story for The Express, which says there are calls for the Prime Minister to get personally involved in pay negotiations. But in an interview with the Daily Mail, Rishi Sunak describes the Royal College of Nursing's pay demands as unreasonable. The resulting disruption from both strikes and the pleas to call them off are the main focus for the Daily Telegraph. The Metro has word of a contentious exchange between Mr Barclay and Sarah Pennington-Old, whose 3-year-old daughter is currently in hospital being treated for cystic fibrosis, over how she feels the government's health policies are putting her child at risk. That is also the lead story for the Daily Mirror. You are working nurses to the bone, their headline there. And meantime, The Star has word of broadcaster Jeremy Clarkson expressing his regret after a column he wrote for The Sun about Meghan Markle was branded misogynist. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. But let's bring in our guests then. We are joined by Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe and Ali Miraj. Welcome to both of you. And Jasmine, let's go straight to your paper, your byline, in fact, about the impact of both the nurses' strike on Tuesday and the ambulance staff at the strike on Wednesday, with this meeting with Steve Barclay and some of the unions tomorrow.
Yeah, so we know that there are a host of strikes going on this week. So we've got the postal strike, there are also rail strikes, but it's really what's happening in the health service that is causing the most consternation among ministers. So Health Secretary Steve Barclay is due to meet with some of the ambulance unions tomorrow. That includes GMB, Unite and Unison. They're due to take part in a strike on Wednesday. Now, there are real concerns within the government and within the health service about what impact an ambulance strike will actually mean on the running of services. And it's quite notable that we've heard from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as well as Barclay today, who have really been talking quite tough on this issue. And they've argued that the government's door is always open and they're willing to discuss various issues with the health unions as it pertains to things like working conditions, but they're not budging on pay. Their argument has been that an independent pay body has set the recommendations, and that was set and agreed to by the government in, I think it was July of this year, and they are sticking to that. Now, they're putting forward all these economic arguments. They're arguing that actually the government needs to control inflation. They want to take a sensible approach, but ultimately this is turning into a big political issue for the government as well. But if we look at some of the polling, it shows that actually a lot of the public are pretty sympathetic to individuals who are striking, but particularly those who are striking in the health service. And I think I do wonder, despite the tough talk by the government, at some point there has to be some sort of turning point, especially as we're hearing all these concerns from health leaders about what the impact this week's strikes could actually have.
Well, indeed. And Ali, it is now, is it not, about impact mitigation and indeed advice to members of the public, some suggestions that actually people should already be told what to do. If we take a look at the Guardian, real suggestions there about the risk to lives of people dialing 999. We've already heard that if you're frail or elderly, one trust suggesting you could be on the floor for 24 to 48 hours. Elsewhere, the North West Ambulance Service giving a foretaste of the chaos, suggesting that patients have to get themselves to hospital unless they were having a cardiac arrest or facing another threat to their life. Mothers-to-be will have to do the same unless they are having an obstetric emergency. So, this is you're out for yourself right now, aren't you, with the ambulance strikes coming up?
It's absolutely dire, and this is the problem that the government has. I mean, you basically, as you say, you are out for yourself. And if you're like my mother, who had 2 falls in the last few years, I mean, if it hadn't been for the ambulance service, we would have been in big trouble. And that's the problem. A lot of people at this time of year, things are cold, people are on their own. if you fall over and fracture your hip, I mean, you could be lying there for days, potentially get hypothermia, and that would be the end. I mean, it's pretty drastic, and it is very, very difficult right now. It looks like the ambulance service are only going to come to the most acute emergencies. Even heart attacks, you're going to have to wait up to 90 minutes potentially to get someone to come and get you. And then once you get to hospital, 6 out of 10 people in certain areas are having to wait at least an hour, if not longer, to get into the hospital itself. And this was a problem that even began before the strikes took hold, that problem of bed blocking in hospitals caused by shortages in the care sector, both home care and also in care homes, so that you actually have basically blocking of beds in hospitals. So people can't actually access them, and people are being backed up in ambulances outside. It's a really, really difficult situation. I think there are two issues here. In the short term, there's the issue around pay. Jasmine's talked about the government talking tough. They're doing that because they do not want to stoke inflationary pressures. They're saying, Rishi Sunak's been very explicit, saying he does not want a wage price spiral. But then you've also got a medium-term issue, which was alluded to by Sajid Javid, the former health secretary, a few days ago, saying that the NHS is effectively not fit for purpose. It's not going to be fit for purpose, given the massive pressures and demands upon it. I mean, if you take one statistic, before the pandemic took hold, there were 1,300 people waiting longer than a year in this country for treatment. Now there are 400,000. It's like trying to push things down a funnel. There's only a certain amount of space you can do. And that is the problem that we're facing. So the medium-term question we've all got to face up to is, what kind of NHS do we want? Do we want an insurance-based system? Do we want to pay more for some of our treatment? Or are we wedded to this holy grail of free at the point of use? And if so, we're going to all have to pay a lot more tax to make it work better. It's just not servicing the needs and the demands put upon it.
Well, that's a bit of a bigger debate that we can have right here, isn't it? You know, how we fund and what we do for the future of the NHS. But more immediately, Jasmine, the campaign group GP Survival, to which some 9,300 family doctors belong, have written to NHS England's Chief Executive, Amanda Pritchard, saying that the NHS should already have issued practical advice to the public on how to move and transport injured and acutely unwell patients to emergency departments. That's in The Guardian. And that's on the front page of The Sun as well. A&E, call a taxi. You know, is the government too busy sounding tough on pay demands to actually give out public service messaging to people?
Yeah, I mean, the government is really conscious of its messaging at the moment and what it is communicating to the public. But I do think, you know, regardless of what ministers come out and say, ultimately your view of the NHS is shaped by your experience of it. If you're an elderly individual and you have a fall and you can't get adequate help, if you're a pregnant mum and you need to get certain care and you can't, or there's a perception that you can't, ultimately all of that does matter. And I do think there is an element of, you know, at some point there will have to be a breaking point. As Ali noted, even prior to the strikes, there was already a sense that the NHS was under a lot of strain. We know that there were rising flu cases. COVID still a big factor that's impacting hospitals. We know that there were concerns about delays in terms of transferring individuals who had arrived in ambulances to actual A&Es. There's a whole host of issues that are underlying all of these strikes. And I do think what is important to note as well, that the NHS is actually running a service with, you know, thousands of vacancies. And I think as part of as part of this discussion, we do need to think about, you know, well, ultimately, if it's a stressful and difficult job, people need to be paid adequately. And whether that figure is a 19% pay rise, that's for ministers to make a judgment on. But there is an element of, if we want a functioning and healthy health service, then you need to have individuals who feel like they are well paid, well supported. And actually, you know, that comes to the heart of the debate, as Ali was saying. What type of service do we want, and what type of worker do we want, and how much do we want to pay them?
Mm-hmm. And the Daily Express says we don't want to break the bank. This is the nurses. Talk to us. This is the leader of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, making a passionate plea for the Prime Minister to intervene in the dispute for the sake of hundreds of thousands of nurses who feel totally abandoned and let down. But if we take a look at the Daily Mail, there is an interview with Rishi Sunak suggesting he will hold out for months. Now, the RCN today, Ali, suggested their mandate was for 6 months. I mean, could we be looking at nearly 6 months of strike action here?
Well, look, potentially, but that will be absolutely horrendous. I mean, look, both sides have to keep these talks going, get around the table. I think the Health Secretary's been quite clear, saying that there was an independent pay review body that came up with 3 to 4%. That was what was decided. Now, there's been some pushback around that, saying that was all decided before we had rampant inflation at between 10 and 11%. You've then got Pat Cullen, who I must say, I don't think is serving her members particularly well. I do have a lot of sympathy, by the way, with nurses getting a decent pay rise, particularly as we clap for them during COVID every Thursday. It's easy to clap, much harder to pay people properly. But 19% is not a serious basis for negotiation. And also, playing the low blow card of like saying that the health secretary is not seriously engaging with nurses because 90% of them are female is just not realistic, and it's a low blow given the fact that there's strike action writ large across the public sector, and also making claims that there's trafficking going on of nurses from certain countries, including Kenya. Look, if Pat Cullen wants to make a serious charge against that should be investigated, then that's fine. But I think we need to be sensible on both sides here. I think all the language needs to be temperate. We need to diffuse this. I do think ministers are going to have to get around the table. I don't think they're going to be able to indefinitely hide behind this or use this independent peer review body indefinitely as an excuse. But 19% is not serious. There's going to have to be some sort of deal done.
Okay.
Sunak's betting it at the moment because he doesn't want to lead to inflationary pay rises across the public sector, which I also understand.
OK, Ali, thank you. The 19%, of course, is inflation, plus those years of austerity which held down pay, which we should bear in mind too, I guess. Anyway, lots more still to come, including what happens when democracy overrules you. It's a problem facing Donald Trump and Elon Musk tonight, discussing them both next. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe and Ali Miraj. Welcome back to both of you. So, Mr. Trump, Jasmine, yes, what will happen to him next? This congressional committee who's been looking into the January the 6th attacks suggests that he should face criminal charges.
Yeah, so it's quite a damning conclusion. They say that he should face 4 charges. They relate to things such as obstruction of official proceedings, of inciting or comforting an insurrection. So it's quite a striking conclusion at the end of what's been quite a tumultuous inquiry into what happened on January the 6th, 2021. Now, I think it's quite interesting when we step back and put this in the context of that Donald Trump is trying to position himself as returning to the front of Republican politics. And I think this conclusion is a reminder of the divisiveness that his presidency resulted in. And I suspect there is an element of it doesn't really change anyone's mind. If you were in favor of Trump, you see that and think, well, it was the establishment against him. If you were against Trump, you think, well, this confirms what we already knew. And so in some ways, it doesn't necessarily move the story along, but it is a helpful example of actually how impactful Trump's actions and words were on that day.
Yes, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens next with that. In the meantime, Elon Musk making the front page of the FT. Ali, tell us more.
Well, this is Elon Musk actually putting out a tweet, a poll on Twitter, asking his followers whether he should actually stand down as CEO of Twitter, and saying that he would abide by the result. Now, so far, 57% of those that have actually bothered to reply to this poll do want him to stand. And you've got to bear in mind that he's also running SpaceX and Tesla. Tesla's share price has been taking a big hit in recent months on the back of his acquisition of Twitter. And he's obviously made a lot of changes since acquiring it for $44 billion. There is someone who apparently has got a lot of internet support to step up, which is Snoop Dogg. If he wants to step away from sipping gin and juice and take over as CEO of Twitter, then he can. I mean, I think he'd have a lot of support for doing that. But realistically, Elon Musk is going to have to decide whether he can find someone to do what he wants to do. I mean, at the moment, he's already talked about Twitter potentially going bankrupt if it's not turned around. It's in financial difficulties. He's sacked a load of people. And he's also had loads of free speech questions to answer as well, in terms of how to balance free speech with a complete and utter free-for-all. So not an easy one for him to do. But he is the archetypal CEO, so we'll have to see what he does.
Yeah, and he'd still be the boss, even above a CEO, wouldn't he, as the owner? Anyway, a quick soz from Clarkson, Daily Star, in just 30 seconds. Sorry, Jasmine.
Yeah, it's quite a striking U-turn. So Clarkson had this article in The Sun where he expressed in quite vivid terms, what he'd like to do to Meghan Markle. It was quite a striking article, and there's been a lot of backlash in terms of whether the language he used was appropriate. And he seems to sort of had a bit of a mea culpa and apologised for some of the language. But I think it does speak to the fact that Meghan and Harry in their documentary, they did talk about the fact that they felt as though the media.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Run out of time. Do apologise. Jasmine, Ali, thank you both. See you later.